welcome everyone. Fantastic to have you with us, and welcome to this part 2 Good to Great series. Thank you very much for your attendance and for your interest and enthusiasm around advancing your own officiating. I certainly recognise that there's a lot of intelligence and knowledge within the room. Certainly plan to tap into that. Looking forward to seeing how you're going to take this session forward. This session is yours, it's not mine. So thank you for what you're about to do. I'll give you permission to take notes. I would love you to contribute. I'd love you to challenge me. Feel free to make mistakes. There's generally no wrong answers in these sessions, but this is a place to make them. I would like to think as we go through, I'm going to try and keep the language as neutral as I can around the sports. It was great to have 10 sports register for this webinar today. And not everyone has turned up, but we certainly are encouraged by the variation and variety of sports in the room. And with that in mind, I want you to think about the gaps, the performance gaps in your officiating, and see how you might be able to take something away from what we present today, or a contribution for another person in the room. And of course, as Simon was saying, as part of the login process, look at who's in the room and feel free to make a connection either during the session or after the session, and continue to build your officiating network. That's where we tend to learn more. So cross-pollination is obviously a great tool to use. Okay, so let's get into this and see how we go. Here's a bit of a saying that certainly applies to cricket, and it probably applies to your sport as well. When someone comes on and knocks on your door or asks you a question around your officiating, people want consistency. That's certainly the challenge, but unfortunately they don't want it all the time. What do I mean by that? Well, they only want consistency when it suits them. And I'm going to sort of, focus on obviously the art of officiating, but you cannot be consistent with the art of the officiating. You can be consistent within your style. But what I want to add into this session is around softening some of the hard edges, but that ability to show discretion and to deliver what the game expects. And that's going to be slightly different from official to official, but in general terms, and if we apply the 80-20 rule here, most of us should know what our game expects us to do when we officiate. And if we don't, we certainly need to find out from your governing body, from the selectors, from the people who appoint you. So this is what we're going to do in this session. It's a pretty crammed agenda, but 3 main topics. We want to talk about managing the match, or managing the event or the contest, and managing the participants within that. Section 2, we want to talk about some technique. So the art of officiating from a technique perspective, and then look at decision making and what does that involve, and how can we improve some of our officiating accuracy in terms of decision making. That's what we're going to go through. Underlying all of that, some of you may have seen this slide from my other sessions before, but I would like you to think about what is the fundamental around the officiating package. So I always talk about the 4 C's in the package: the chemistry, the character, the competencies, and the capabilities. And when we go from good to great, to be good, you need to have those competencies and you need to have those capabilities. Always working on those things. You know, what can you do and how good can you be? Those competencies and characters, the fundamentals that give us the ability to officiate. And really that's the accreditation or the introduction to officiating. But it's the chemistry and character for me that make the difference. And particularly the character on the art of officiating. So what sort of person are you? We're going to get into some styles around being approachable, being empathetic towards the participants, and understanding and being a good listener, and the integrity also around character and doing the right thing. That's what integrity is. That's why knowing what your sport wants is so important. So if you don't know what your game expects, what your sport expects, I'd be surprised, but find out. And chemistry is about that teamwork. And for those of you that have heard me before, I really bang on about the third team. In any sport, we need that third team to be really tight, to be supportive, but also to be focused on team success. You know, for me, I do see a lot of ego in officiating, which is good, but too much ego is bad. You know, I think that ego is going to drive us. It's going to want us to see successful and good things happen. But being successful together, there's no point in one official having a good match, having a good game, and another official not. We need to be successful together. So those 4 pillars really underpin what I'm going to go through tonight. So let's look at managing the match, and we're going to go through some discretion, what does the game expect, but then effective communication. So I'd love some audience participation here, love to use the intelligence in the room. In your sport, in your officiating, can someone unmute or put in the chat box? I don't mind which one you do. But what does discretion look like when you officiate? What do you do? What do you say? What might happen? Give us an example of good discretion being used in officiating. Chat box or unmute. Go for it.
I'll be willing to go first.
Thank you.
So I referee squash. We have 2 players running around a medium-sized box at best.
Yep.
They have to be near each other. They have to be near a dangerous swing. We have to be looking for subtle movements around. And you can use your discretion by looking at the characters of the players on court. And it can vary match to match, person to person. But 2 players who are genuinely making a good effort, if a 50-50 call comes up where there's been a bit of contact, you can be harsh, or you can, rather strict, or you can be sympathetic. And if you agree with the yes let, which is just to replay the point rather than someone was at fault, somebody wins the point.
Yep.
Because they're being good people on court, they're doing the little things well. You can apply your discretion there, and the choice of discretion can change the nature of the rest of the match if you get it wrong.
Yep, that's great. In your sport, you've got that ability to replay the point, don't you? So I think sympathy and empathy are 2 really good qualities to have in there. Thank you. That's really good. Anyone else? How would you apply the art of discretion in your sport when you officiate?
Simon, John Morris. How are
Hi,
you?
John. Good, mate.
Good. I suppose from an athletics point of view, if you're the person in charge of the game, called the track referee, around the arena or the 400-metre track, you've got umpires, and if they see a breaking of the rules, an infringement, they fill out a form. It can be 1 form, can be 2 forms if more than one person sees it, and then it comes to the referee, and at the bottom of their sheet, as the referee, you have 3 types of discretion. You can take no action, you can give somebody a warning, or you can disqualify them. So I suppose that's inculcated into the rules of athletics. And again, it depends on the situation, the age group of the athletes, the level of competition as to how far the discretion goes, but that's built in.
Yeah, certainly what I wanted to raise, John, which you've touched on, is discretion may look different depending upon what age group that you're officiating or what level you're officiating. You know, applying a different level of discretion to juniors as opposed to experienced competitors or athletes is certainly something to be considered. You know, we're educating the younger people or the inexperienced people within the sport, and we don't want to see them turned away by no discretion being shown. So I think that's something to consider for sure. So thanks, John. Great. Anyone else before I throw some suggestions and ideas at you?
Simon, it's Matt Gleeson. I might just add on to what John said there. And even before those judges around the park of athletics make the call, they do something which is very familiar to you in your role, which is they give the benefit of the doubt to the athlete. It is, after all, the discretion of, whilst there might have been an infringement there, was it intentional? Was it made by a knock-on effect of other things? And that decision making comes down to where that benefit lies. And obviously, the sport is there for the athlete and for the entertainment of the spectators. So
Yeah.
That's the discretion I'd probably add in.
No, thank you. And I think you're touching on a good point around context as well, because if you're going to disqualify an athlete, that's a pretty final type of application of rules. And if there's any discretion that can be shown or any context that might have mitigating circumstances and you apply that, that's probably, again, what your sport might expect. So,
Simon, yeah, Barry's made the point that it's probably necessary to think about the level of experience of the athletes that you are officiating as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it certainly does have a role to play. So let's have a look at what some of the art of discretion tools might look like and see whether or not we've captured them all. And if we have missed some, then feel free to let us know at the end of this. So certainly in my sport, the art of discretion might look like having a quiet word or having a conversation on the run with a player. So there may have been an infringement, there may have been an act that's on that borderline, that 50-50, type of situation, and having a word with them on the fly to say, number one, we've seen it, or we've picked it up. We've picked it up, and it hasn't gone unnoticed, but you're also laying the foundation that if you then need to blow it up, or you need to issue a formal caution or a disqualification or penalise, you're not working from zero. You're working from the fact that you've already spoken to them a couple of times. And so that might be, with me, they're close to the line, they're close to running on the pitch, they're close to infringing with bad behaviour, they're becoming overly verbal. So having a quiet word with them in a break of play or in a moment where they're passing you and say, hey, settle down, that's enough, that's your limit, that type of thing. So you can go from that quiet word to being more overt and being very visible. That's something you can think about. So that's what I was sort of then branching out onto and giving a caution on the run and letting the game flow, or letting the match flow, or letting the competition flow. If it's not going to have a major impact on what's happening, and if your sport is one that you can play the advantage, I think most sports want the advantage to be played. But like in netball, advantage, let's play on. Exactly what I was talking about. Okay. And then this very difficult area to train and educate about when to step in. If you step in too early, there could be a problem. And if you step in too late, there's a problem. Quite common when you've got two players having a go at each other, or if you've got a player versus umpire or official, and the other official comes and jumps in too early when it's actually being handled, then all of a sudden it becomes either, in the first case where it was player versus player, it can become player versus umpire or official, or it becomes player versus umpire versus umpire. And you want to make sure that you don't step in too early and pour fuel on the fire by turning it into something that it wasn't to start with. And if you step in too late, you've just lost control, and it's actually out of control and there's no way of getting that back. So I think what some of you were talking about before, reading the situation, reading the context, and thinking to yourself, is this standard okay? Will it run itself out? And who's involved in it? And if you know the participants reasonably well, you know where this might go. So let it run its course, because one thing we know is that players generally like to at least get things off their chest. And if you jump in too quickly and they're not given that chance to vent and to get that off their chest, then that's exacerbated by the second problem, which is, hey, you've actually interrupted me, or you're not letting me get it off my chest, and it becomes a different issue. So sometimes it's actually best to let that go, let them vent, and then say, right, are we okay now? Have we calmed down? Are we right now? Can we continue? And is there another way to get that shift in behaviour that you're looking for? And you might be able to work through another player or work through a captain of the team to say, go and have a talk with Joe over there. He's getting close to the line. Knowing your players, knowing your participants, but is the penalty the only way and the right way to actually draw attention to this and to get behaviour to be shifted? So in my game, for example, if a team is running very slow with their over rates and with the pace of the game, we may have a chat with the wicketkeeper, who is intrinsically involved in the pace of the fielding side in getting through their overs. So we may have a quiet word with the keeper and say, hey, Brad, mate, you're 2 overs down. We need to speed this game up. And so that's where it's really important, as you've just heard from me use, it's really important to use names and really important to use we and us. Those sorts of things bring people with us rather than against us. And letting them know where that line is, or letting them know what your expectation is through your communication. We'll talk about comms shortly, but people generally don't like surprises. So if you're able to give them full communication, like you're close to the line here, or you're close to being reported for bad behaviour, do you really want to end up at the judiciary on Thursday night? We don't want to be doing paperwork, do you? And putting the pressure back on them. Or if there's a second, or if there's another infringement like this, do you realise you'll be taken off the field or you'll be disqualified? And being very clear to say, this is what the issue is here now, so I'm giving you a chance. But if you're going to continue down this pathway, you might leave us with any opportunity. And this is likely to be, not definitely, but likely to be the outcome. But the choice is yours. So we're putting the pressure on the other person around showing some discretion, but being very complete with our communication. And this is where the three sections I've told you up front for this session really start to overlap. Is there anything else that people wanted to add to that particular list or that descriptive around examples or opportunities for discretion? Have we sort of captured most of them?
Yeah, John, I think the graduation is good, Simon, because I think most of us with experience go through that. We start off quietly, and then we have to rev it up as we see fit.
Yeah, it's great. I think the term, John, that we would use would be escalation. So can we start at a lower end and then escalate as we need to? Officials who tend to not escalate but go hard straight away and issue that parking ticket or that speeding fine as an official, nobody tends to like that style of officiating, but it is important to set the standard of what's acceptable or not pretty early on within the contest, because if we don't do that, then there could be problems, particularly when you might have known problem players or participants or known problem teams. So it's about being alert to those issues and not alarmed. But you're right, that escalation is a fantastic way. And that's probably what we're talking about here is we don't want to go too hard too early, but we do want to lay the clear expectation about what's acceptable and what's not. Thank you. Anyone else before I move on? Are we good? Yep. So what can we do to stay out of the match or the contest as much as possible? I've used this before when talking to pathway officials and also officials looking to climb the ladder who want to show selectors, who want to show the game and the stakeholders that they're very good. Chances are when you're standing out as an official, you're probably doing something wrong. Not always, there's an exception to every rule, but most of the time when people are talking about officials, and think about other officials in your sport, if we're talking about them, generally it's because they're blowing something that's not quite right, or they've interpreted it not quite right, or they're not fitting in with what the game expects. So think about your behaviours and think about, are you approachable as an official? Some officials will take offence with people coming to ask them questions or query decisions during a contest or during a match, or even in a break in play. My style has always been that if you discourage a lot of that, and there's obviously, you know, the right way to do that as opposed to the wrong way, and you know what that is. But I tend not to discourage people coming to ask a question or to query or to, I suppose, complain, to vent. you know, in some ways, I actually quite like it when a coach comes to me to complain, because it's telling me that at least they're comfortable in coming to talk to me. And I think as long as we stay in dialogue, that's a good thing. So being approachable, but then remaining respectful and being that role model in how we deal with those areas is really important. So I think some of you might have heard me use the term mirror behaviour, that we need to be the change that we want to see in other people's behaviour. And the art of officiating is really about being that calmest person in the room, being super composed under pressure and remaining as rational and less emotional as much as we can. That ability to control your emotions when other participants, other coaches, other support staff are losing theirs, losing control of theirs, is the winner, is the winner. And sometimes we can then use our fellow team officials in that context to be able to be a foil, you know, and actually take our frustrations out with them privately, away from those competitors and people who are complaining. So think about, are you standing out with your style and behaviours? Are you fitting in, remaining relatively unobtrusive and keeping the focus on the participants, on the play, on the sport? And we can do that by ensuring that our signals are very clear, that they're very obviously correct, but they're confident, that they appear confident. So when I, in my sport, call a no ball or I give someone out, the messaging and the body language is very consistent with the message of the verbal or the decision. So if we want to convey confidence, that art of officiating is about being as nervous and fearful inside as you can, because most of us are driven by fear as an official, fear of making a mistake. But what we do outwardly with tone of voice or with our signalling, that art of officiating needs to sell confidence. And we do that through just very firm, tall, strong signalling or blowing of the whistle, very important. And to sort of apply rules, as we just talked about, around delivering the intent, delivering the outcome that we're looking for. But why is that rule there? What's it trying to do? What's it trying to achieve? And making sure that obviously that knowledge is strong. So as an official, we have to know everything that we're supposed to know. But there's a way that we can apply those rules and regulations with a bit of sympathy, which was raised, with a bit of empathy, with some context. I use the term common sense very sparingly, because there isn't such a thing as common sense. But I think that there is an officiating framework of what the intention of the rule or the regulation might be. What are we trying to achieve? And within that, I talked about that term up front called consistency. We do need to be consistent, but there has to be a little bit of a soft edge to that. You know, we don't like that parking ticket. We don't like that speeding fine. Is there another way? Can we, and I'll use this term shortly, look at a shade of grey rather than black and white? And I think at the end of the day, you just need to be super comfortable that you've maintained the integrity of officiating and maintain the integrity of your sport, but you've created an environment where the participants are safe, comfortable, and are being treated fairly, which is, again, a very much an abstract concept. And managing this game together and being on the same page, you know, so your pre-match chat, your pre-event tournament discussion with your officials around interpretations and applications, so that there's not seen to be a disagreement and officials aren't sort of standing out by having not an argument, but having a strong discussion about an interpretation or application during the contest. You know, we don't want to see that. We want to have done that pre-work already. What if this happens? What if that happens? What are we going to do? What's our process? I hope that makes a bit of sense. So let's look at some of the elements of officiating style and the craft of officiating. So we've sort of touched on empathy, but empathy involves this thing called effective listening. What's the problem? What's the issue? Why have we got to this space? And as I said before, if it's not about saying just, I'm right and you're wrong, but how did we get here? And giving them that opportunity to explain their side or explain their position without sort of holding up the game unnecessarily. If you've seen it, called it, that's okay. But sometimes everything's not black and white. This is a term I love that I've heard from other people within officiating. Officiate, but don't dominate. Officiate, but don't dominate. Think about your officiating style and think about whether you're a very hard-edged official, whether you're a very black and white official, and do you seek to dominate the play, dominate the whistle, dominate the rules and regulations? I know everything. This is the way it's going to be. Bang, 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 bang. What does your rapport relationship look like with the players, the captains, the participants, the stakeholders, the coaches? What does that look like? Are you building an effective rapport with them where you are approachable, where they listen to you as much as you listen to them? And are they accepting of your decisions and rulings? And if they're not, or if there's an element there that they're not, you may want to think about your style in this space. So we talked about quiet word, cautions on the run. It's been interesting in my sport, and maybe it's happening in yours, where the more that there is a broadcasting, where there's more of a streaming of our competitions, and we're seeing more and more community matches being streamed on things like Frogbox, where the audience online now exists. And a lot of sports are leaning towards instructing their officials to be more overt with cautions and warnings, so that everyone who's watching from outside the contest understands what's going on. And so I'm just very conscious around, yeah, that's necessary, and I can see the value in that. I'm conscious of that not being the only tool that we use, and forgetting about the art of officiating and the discretion that we talked about and all these other tools that we should be employing. I know that internationally, and we've got a few international officials in the room, which is really great, a lot of governing bodies are just basically saying, you know what, don't talk to the captains about this anymore. Don't give them a quiet word. Don't warn them. If you see it, blow it, penalise it, no ball it, do whatever. That's okay for the administrators. I'm not sure that does anything to promote good relationships between officials and players. So I'd really counsel you on maintaining that art of discretion, maintaining clear and open communication in that space, not just using one of these tools. Use the whole toolbox. And we've talked about escalations already, which is great. No surprises. No surprises. No one likes you blowing a penalty or, disqualifying someone out of the blue. They need to be clear. They need to be, we know what's going to happen. But most of the big blow-ups in sport happens when, where did that call come from? Where did that ruling come from? For those of you that were watching one of the Rugby Union Bledisloe Cup games recently that was being played in Melbourne, I think it was, and referee from France, I think it was, blew a penalty at the last minute of the game, basically, to take the ball off the Wallabies for not kicking it out quickly enough. And you just think, where did that ruling come from? And none of us want to criticise fellow officials, but was that what the game expected? where did that come from? And all of a sudden, that one decision that came from nowhere became the whole talking point out of the match and just changed the whole focus of the contest, not to mention the result. But hopefully that example rams this home for you. This is a really important one around the craft of officiating. And I sort of touched on this before around when I said ego. We need some ego. We need that really strong drive to be better, to be really leading by example. But at the same time, if we have this view that we know it all and that there's no reason to actually go back to that situation and say, if I had my time over again, how would I do it differently? If we don't have that self-reflection, that opportunity to say, what's the learning out of that example, we're missing a trick. We all get that one. And for me, this is the real kicker. You know, through your officiating, if you get the feeling that you're not building rapport and earning the respect from the participants and the stakeholders, then chances are you need to shift. You need to think about your style. And if you are, congratulations, it's working. And keep looking to explore and keep looking to be a good person of character. Come back to that pillar, good person of character. Because at the end of the day, when you turn up and they see you turn up and they feel as though that they're safe and comfortable, that's because you're being you. Your style, your personal style is being well accepted. So I've talked about this one already. Certainly don't be hard-edged. Think about, is there an opportunity to show some discretion? Not all the time, but when it's going to work, absolutely. So as I mentioned before, here are some shades of grey. What is the rule? That's pretty much black and white. That's written down. But this is where the grey starts to come in, and that hard black of the rule can actually start to have a bit of a soft edge and also a tint of grey in it. So what's the intention of it? How do we communicate that? When and how should it be applied? And are we then getting the right shift in behaviour? You know, so just think about, with my sport, for example, we take a lot of time now to have what's called an almanac, where we've got the rule or the law, and then we've got an agreed interpretation and application next to it. And we publish that amongst all of the officials, because there's nothing worse than Chinese whispers within the sport about, oh, there was an email there 3 or 4 months ago that said we were supposed to do it this way, or that we are going to do it now differently. Remember that meeting that we had late last year? And I thought there was an agreement to do it differently. If it's not written down next to the rule, next to the regulation, next to the law, and it's been communicated and updated. For example, I'm actually working on this one at the moment. This is the ICC Almanac for T20, and you can see how thick it is. But at least it's written down and it's got clarity for everyone there about when to show some discretion, but more particularly about how to apply the interpretation and intent of the law. Any questions on that first section? Am I going for time? I need to speed up. Okay, feel free to jump in. Technique. Look, here's a great example of some technique, some communication technique that happened at an Australian Open tennis match. And it's an example where if you show a bit of empathy, a bit of compassion, and you don't actually go hard all the time, then you can actually win some fans, you can win some appreciation and win some kudos as an official. And I think that speaks volumes of being just a decent official, but also having that empathy that we touched on before. Sorry, I'm going to go back. Previous. While I've only got the one slide there to do, I want to talk about positioning technique I want you to think about, are you getting in the right position to make the right call? What does that look like for you in your sport? Some of us can only have one position. Others can move around. But are you, for those of you that have to move, are you showing agility? Are you matching your positioning pace with the pace of the game? And if you're not, if you're getting there too quick, that's going to give a perception and also tire you out. If you're not moving enough, then that's going to cause you to be in the wrong position should something happen. What I like about this photo, though, is, again, the body language of position. I mean, she doesn't need to sit up straight upright all the time. The fact that she's leaning in sends a message around what she's trying to do with the player. You know, and having that open body language as well is really important. So positioning is not just about being in the best position to see or hear. It's about matching where you need to be or how you need to look with the context of the competition or sport at the time. Positioning also means having eye contact with a participant at the right time. So if you need to communicate a message, if you need to give a decision, if you need to get involved, then your eyes need to be at that place, but more particularly at that participant. Again, because that will engage, it will show confidence and instill the confidence that they're looking for from you. So positioning technique is part of the art of officiating, no question. Also too, around buying time or considering your options, if you work with other officials in your sport to manage a game or a piece of an event, you can buy think time by going across and having a chat with them and consider your options about how we're going to handle this situation while still remaining in control. Buying time for me is because things happen and you think, how are we going to handle that? What does the playing conditions say there? What does the law say? What does the regulation say? Buying some think time when you're under pressure is super important. So think about, can you move off to the side? Can you go and pick up something from another location? Can you go and get a drink while you buy some think time and consider what your options are and think about the discretion or not that you're going to apply? But buying that think time means that you're not going to act instantly responsive if you can. If you can. The third element of this element of technique we wanted to touch on was, you know, focusing on the right things at the right time. This focus versus concentration. People talk about concentration. We're all concentrating on something at the moment. It may not be listening to me. It may be thinking, well, what am I going to have for dinner when this is finishing? Or what have I got to do next, etc. But for me, focus beats concentration, because from an art of officiating, we have to focus on the right things at the right time. So there'll be a number of plays or a number of particular routines that will happen in your sport, whether it's someone setting up on the blocks, whether it's someone standing at the top of the pool before they jump in, or someone who's about to serve. There is something within that setup that you look at those cues, and you shouldn't be necessarily watching the ball, but there'll be cues that you need to look for that are going to give you more time to make better decisions. We know that the best in the world seem to create more time because they pick up the information cues faster. They know what to look for. So think about staying really connected with the moment, which I'll touch on in a second under decision making. But are you watching the play or are you watching something else? So think about the various plays in your sport, and the art of officiating is knowing what to look for and giving yourself as much time to make those decisions. So when we talk about focus, we've got a very narrow focus on a particular thing that's about to happen. And then if you can then relax at some point and broaden that focus and not sort of be up all the time, you know, because none of us can be up all the time. We can't be concentrating all the time. So we need to shift from a very narrow focus to a very broad focus. Or in a wicketkeeper language, it might be something like we need to switch up for a few seconds. And then once the ball is dead or there's not much happening around us, or we're in a different position and the runners have gone away from our station, we can sort of switch down a bit and just be more alert, more aware of that broad thing that's happening around us. So think about your technique around switching up and switching down and not being super alert all the time. Does anyone want to talk about those technique issues? Is there any questions, comments around positioning, buying time or focus? No? Silence is compliance. We're all good? Okay, well, let's finish with decision making and then take any questions towards the end. So we're going to talk about staying in the moment, trusting yourself and watching the play. So here's a picture. And somewhere in that picture is a leopard. Can anyone find or spot the leopard? When you see it, let me know. Happy for someone to shout out and tell me where it is.
Bottom right.
Yep, correct, bottom right. So the leopard is just at the base of the tree on the right-hand side as you're looking at it. How did you find it so quick?
I actually just sort of started at the bottom left and zigzagged my way up.
Okay.
So left to right, right to left, up one, etc.
Yep. Where is a leopard best camouflaged?
Well, in grass like that.
And this is this concept that I'd love you to connect with when I was talking about watching the play. Because in general, the play is going to look relatively similar. Those cues are going to be looking relatively similarly. So we're not going to focus our attention to areas that we know the play is not going to be. And so that's why when we have to look for certain pieces of information to make better decisions, in your line of officiating, you just need to know what your leopard looks like or where that leopard's likely to be for those particular examples that you need to make decisions on. I hope I'm explaining that relatively well, but I'd like you to think about, do you know what to look for? Do you know what your various cues are that lead you to make better decisions? Because in my sport, you don't hear and see everything you want to. You know, it's certainly complicated by a play or, there's something that might happen behind you or something that's on a different angle or something that you can't see or hear. And your field of vision might be obscured for various reasons. So there's other pieces of information, other cues that you just need to be alert to. And it sort of goes along that line that if it looks like a pig, it smells like a pig and it oinks like a pig, well, chances are it's a pig, even though you haven't seen it. I'm trying to get you to think about this concept of trying to find and define that leopard around what you have to make decisions on. And you'll find that your educated guesses, and I need to use that term guessing, even though we don't guess, we have to follow our gut, which I'll touch on in a second. But there are some decisions that you'll make that you'll just use your experience on. And how do we grow that gut feeling, that gut instinct quicker? Because we've created this concept of we relatively know what to look for and we know where we're likely to find that information, even though it might not be complete. And so I think surreptitiously what you said there is fantastic about, well, if we're going to expect to find the leopard camouflaged in the grass, if it was in the tree, it'd stand out. We would have seen it pretty clearly, but it's not. So it must be somewhere camouflaged. It must be hidden. So I hope that makes sense. But around decision making, and we talk about the art of officiating, here are 3 concepts that should lead you to being able to make better decisions more confidently and more accurately. No guarantees here, but if we're talking high percentage and we all just focus on how do we get more right than wrong, but how do we get as many right as we can? So we can't be perfect, but we can be excellent. What does high percentage look like? So point number 1 is about trusting you, trust yourself, and trust your process. Now, trusting yourself is about using that gut that I was just talking about, that your first impression is normally your right one. And think about the mistakes that you've made or the errors that you've made in the art of officiating. And if you're anything like me, and I'm happy for people to unmute and tell us your story, but normally I make mistakes when I don't trust my instinct or my first reaction and I overthink it, or the process has been wrong. In other words, number 3, I'm just not connected to the moment. I haven't been in the here and now, and my focus hasn't been on the right thing at the right time. Has anyone got an example, or do they disagree with that, or can they corroborate any of that? What about you, Barry? Does that make sense for you?
Yeah, it does, Simon, because when in athletics you're watching the bend, for instance, you can't watch all eight lanes. So what you're looking for is, say in practice, as they're doing a start at a 200, you look at how are they close to the line, and that, oh, okay, lane 4 is very close, I'll keep an eye on that. Or when they start, sweep across with a quick view and say, okay, it's going to be lane 2 and lane 3.
Yeah, fantastic. And Barry, with that art of discretion, or at least that no surprises policy, have you ever said to the starters coming up to say, hey, listen, we've just noted this with the 2 other groups that have started. We just want to remind you not to do this?
Yeah, as a starter, I would do that. And even at the beginning, when you've got particularly young kids, turn around to them and say, this is what I'm expecting. Go through the rule. This is what I'm expecting. Everybody then knows what you expect and what is going to be done. Yep.
Thank you. That's great. Deanna, do you connect with the concept of trusting your gut? When do you find that you make errors at your level?
Well, a lot of it is focus, because you've got to be on and then off, or up and down, as you were talking about. It's a matter of you're doing it all day, and you're doing a number of events, one after the other, and it's quite easy to get too tired.
Well, thank you. Sorry, Deanna, can I ask you for your view on trusting your gut? When do you find that you make mistakes? If you can hear me, Deanna, can you unmute and let us know? Maybe Deanna's dropped off. Okay, I'll move forward and then maybe I'll ask a couple more people towards the end. So trusting your gut, trusting your process, the process that works for you, and following that and improving that as much as you can, gets you to make more accurate decisions. 2 is around committing to the decision, committing to the piece of communication. You know, we don't make decisions like this, and we don't make decisions like that. We talked about the eye contact. So the body language needs to commit, and also the tone of voice or the call has to match the message. So if you're going to make a ruling, commit to it. If you're going to let something go, commit to it. People will pick up this indecision as much as as much as you let them. But please make sure that all of the messaging and the decision itself you feel comfortable with, and really sell it. 3 is about connecting to the moment. You know, studies have shown that we spend less than 20% of our time, our think time, actually in the moment, in the here and now. So for me, it's about keeping my hands and mind in the same spot. So one of the techniques that I've used in the past is I need my mind to be where my hands are. I need my concentration and particularly my focus in here and now. Most of our think time is spent in the past. How did I get that wrong? Or what are they going to say post-match or post-tournament? What are the selectors going to say? What are the media going to say? Rather than being in the here and now. Because we all talk about don't worry about it, let it go. Most of us mentally still can't connect to the moment. We drift off, and that's where your self-awareness really needs to kick in. Am I going 4 or 5 minutes? Okay, so here's the kicker around being distracted mentally when we start caring too much about what other people think. This realization that, look, we're always being judged, whether it's in competition or outside of competition. The art of officiating means that you are intrinsically strong enough to trust yourself, to follow your gut and your instincts, to be the official that you want to be, to back your calls and commit to them, and not care too much about what other people think. So be yourself. Be the official that you want to be. Don't try to be like another official or imitate another official. Be the official that you want to be. And realize that if you do want to get some feedback or you do want to, stress test some of those elements, you do that in a way that doesn't show insecurity or doesn't build upon insecurity. And fear and insecurity killed more officiating careers than anything else. So do that with trusted colleagues, and that's a separate topic itself, but really just have the courage and the self-awareness that you just need to be you. Don't try to be someone else, because you'll be more good by doing what comes naturally than trying to be non-genuine, not authentic. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that adds a bit of value. Hopefully that gives you a better scope about the art of officiating. I guarantee you that a lot of you probably already know some of that basic content, but there may have been some performance area gaps that you've identified there that you could say, well, maybe I can do that a bit differently. Maybe I can soften some of those hard edges. Maybe I can be a bit more approachable. Maybe I can mirror behave. Maybe I can be a bit more composed. Maybe I can trust myself a bit more. Are there any final questions in the room that you'd like to challenge me on or to reinforce? Happy to take that now.
I was just going to say that your points 1 and 2 on the previous section, I find that when I'm struggling to think of what my decision is, it's because I'm adding layers onto my brain is processing subconsciously. If the decision is just coming to me, it's quick, and it comes down to a committing. If I'm not saying my decision quickly, players will often sense that I might not be committing to it. I might be overthinking to it.
And second guessing yourself. Yeah, absolutely. I've done that too, big time.
It's one of those things that as I've had to learn and improve my process along the way, sometimes I have added new things, and like a golfer being given advice. Sometimes that makes me worse for the meantime because I'm thinking about the new thing. And eventually my brain assimilates it into the, into the routine, and the decisions start coming out different to how they used to, but quickly and accurately.
Yeah, good point you raised. Thanks for sharing that. I think don't work on too much of your game at the one time. And I don't think you don't need to change too much in a hurry. So this is about making small shifts in your game and then giving yourself space and time to at least leave that shift embed itself before you move on to something different or new. Really connect with what you said about overthinking decisions. And so sometimes when you take too long to make a decision, you then panic. You've lost your process. You've lost your routine. So keep that as strong and consistent as possible. Absolutely. Thanks. Anyone else got a thought? Any contribution, question? Mark, are you okay with all that?
Yeah, I appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
No worries. Cherry, what about you in your sport? Swimming.
Am I unmuted?
You are.
You are. Oh, good. Okay. I think the most important thing that I've taken away from the last couple of comments is that in our formative years, when we're training and going through the processes of becoming a better and better official at higher levels, we model ourselves off people. We watch and we learn, and sometimes it's very hard for us to become then an individual, as you're saying, be yourself. So I think that it's important that as we watch and we grow and we take away from what we see the points that we go, you know, I like that. I thought that guy did a good job, or I really appreciated the fact that that person did such and such, that we then take that away, but model it to be our own individual, as in my case, referee. Yeah. So that's an important point for all the up and comers to remember that as much as you can take away from the people, your mentors, and that, you still have to become your own referee.
Correct. And do it your way.
Yes, exactly.
Spot on. And so what can you learn off other officials by watching them about what works and what doesn't work for them? And is that something, that technique, that strategy apply to what you do to take your game to the next level? Spot on. Thank you for sharing that. Very good. Anyone else? One more final comment. Any other questions before we wrap up and hand back to Simon? Are we all good? Are we all silent? Thanks again, everyone. I hope you got something out of that session. Really enjoyed working with many of you this year, and all the best for the festive season coming up.